ISIS, the most powerful terrorist organization in the world. But now, has it disappeared? What happened? This is America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Take a moment to subscribe to this channel and turn the notification bell on, because on America Uncovered, fake news gets real. ISIS! Have you heard about them in a while? Because I kind of remember when that was all we could talk about.
These are the areas ISIS holds so far. Their goal is to form an Islamist state ruled by Sharia law.
Tonight, experts warn that ISIS will continue to thrive in countries like Libya and Syria.
Gunfire erupted on the streets of the Iraqi city of Kirkuk after ISIS militants launched a surprise attack.
Even on the 2016 campaign trail, it seemed like presidential candidates were competing over who could commit the most crimes against humanity to stop ISIS.
Senator Cruz, you advocate what you call carpet bombing or saturation bombing to defeat ISIS, citing the more than 1,100 air attacks a day the U.S. carried out during the first Gulf War in 1991. Explain how a strategy to defeat a standing army would work against an unconventional terrorist group that is now hiding amongst the population.
To be fair, Ted Cruz's ideas got a lot better over time. For instance, he had the idea to grow a beard. Anyway, nowadays we barely hear about ISIS. Why is that? Because President Trump went Rambo on them and now ISIS is destroyed. At least that's what I assume based on his tweet from the end of 2018.
We have defeated ISIS in Syria. My only reason for being there during the Trump presidency.
Now that certainly would be great news. ISIS was considered one of the most dangerous terrorist organizations in the world. So if ISIS has been defeated, that would be cause for celebration. But how can ISIS be defeated if, a few weeks after Trump's tweet, an ISIS attack killed 4 Americans? Well, it turns out the battle against ISIS is not completely finished, something Trump acknowledged in a later tweet that came out after the "We have defeated ISIS" one, but before news of the terrorist attack.
We will be leaving Syria at a proper pace while at the same time continuing to fight ISIS and doing all else that is prudent and necessary.
So which is it? Have we defeated ISIS or not? I know everyone would like to avoid another mission accomplished moment. Well, it turns out, since Trump became president, ISIS has been beaten almost to the point of destruction.
The final battle is in its final days, with ISIS pinned down to an area of around a quarter of a square mile.
That's right. Since Trump took office, ISIS has been beaten back to a single small town. And keep in mind that at its peak in 2015, ISIS had conquered territory covering roughly a third of Iraq and half of Syria. U.S. officials have said that ISIS has lost 99.5% of its territory. That's pretty embarrassing for a terrorist group that less than 3 years ago was killing foreigners and threatening to invade Great Britain.
He says that ISIS will conquer the UK and force it under Sharia law.
But by last week, ISIS had been reduced to a few dozen tents outside a single town. And this week, it seems they're not even controlling that town anymore, but have gone into underground tunnels. That's disturbing. I can't believe people are living in a place where it's acceptable to shoot vertical video. But this destruction of ISIS is pretty incredible. So how come this isn't the huge story dominating the news cycle? I mean, we've spent more time this year arguing about the Covington Catholic kids. Well, it turns out Trump knew nothing about fighting ISIS, and he had no strategy. And that's why he was so successful. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said he overheard a phone conversation between President Trump and Defense Secretary James Mattis, and it went something like this.
We're asking permission to send 50 of our soldiers into a village outside Raqqa.
Why are you calling me? I don't know where this village is at.
Well, that's what we've done for the last 8 years.
Who's asking to go into that village?
A major, first in his class at West Point.
Why do you think I know more about that than he does?
Now, this was only Senator Graham's recollection of the call, but in general, this does seem to have been Trump's strategy. Let the military make the strategy. This is quite different than what President Obama did. In 2015, he implemented a zero civilian casualty policy. It meant the U.S. would not attack ISIS fighters if civilians might be killed as well. Now obviously that sounds like a good thing, except ISIS knew this policy, so it constantly used civilians as human shields. According to John McCain, then acting as the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, 75% of airstrikes were called back for fear of killing civilians.
We're just referring to airstrikes. Do you know that 75% of those combat missions returned to base without having fired a weapon?
According to a retired Air Force lieutenant general, under this policy, there were only an average of 12 airstrikes against ISIS a day, which he called a drizzle. Unfortunately, while the U.S. military made its best effort to avoid killing civilians, in 2015 and 2016, ISIS attacks killed about 2,500 people around the world. But Trump ended the zero civilian casualty policy as part of his personal policy of doing exactly the opposite of Obama. Trump simply let his generals run the war the way they wanted, which included dropping the mother of all bombs. To be clear, this does not mean the U.S. military was suddenly indiscriminately killing civilians. There are still laws regulating armed conflict. But the policy went from zero civilian casualties to allowing reasonable collateral damage when bombing military targets. Sadly, this meant a lot more innocent people were killed in the crosshairs. The total number depends on who's counting, but it seems to be between 700 and 2,000. But at the same time, this new strategy crippled ISIS. This, of course, is not to say that the only reason ISIS has been beaten back is because of the United States. Not at all. There were Iraqi troops. There was the Syrian Arab Army, which was controlled by the Syrian government led by Assad. There were also local Kurds who were backed by the U.S., and there were Russian and Iranian troops who were definitely not backed by the U.S. Yes, a weird unholy trinity of the U.S., Russia, and Iran, all working towards defeating a common enemy. Which just goes to show you, the enemy of my enemy can still be my enemy. But it's not just troops on the ground. Money may have played a part in defeating ISIS as well.
You also have back channels of banking. You have people that you think are our great allies, our friends in the Middle East, that are paying tremendous numbers of dollars, tremendous amounts of money to ISIS. So we have to stop those circuits.
And Trump did stop a lot of those circuits. That being said, ISIS has not been completely defeated. ISIS is a terrorist organization. They successfully built a nation state. That nation state has pretty much been destroyed, but the terrorist organization is still there. Estimates vary, but there could be anywhere from a few hundred to a few thousand ISIS soldiers still left. And while the Trump administration wants to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria, that probably won't happen until ISIS has been completely destroyed. And Trump has recently agreed to keep about 200 U.S. troops in Syria, just to make sure things don't go sideways. That's probably a smart decision. Perhaps they're learning a lesson from 2010, when the Pentagon also thought they had defeated ISIS. Former CIA Director John Brennan said at the time there were only 700 ISIS soldiers left. And according to the leader of the U.S. troops in Iraq in 2010, 34 of the group's top 42 leaders had been killed. In fact, the bounty on one of the surviving leaders dropped from $5 million to just $100,000. That leader was Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the guy who would later lead ISIS in capturing territory roughly equivalent to the size of Great Britain. The bounty on him is now up to $25 million. And he's still missing. What I'm saying is, it's not too late to cash in on that bounty. Dog, he's all yours. I'm also saying, with their leader still in the wind, ISIS could still bounce back. So, was Trump correct when he tweets ISIS has been defeated? Well, not exactly. ISIS is still out there, but their forces have been greatly reduced. And it's a little strange that we haven't heard more about the success against ISIS. This article in The Atlantic suggests that the media have bought into the idea that ISIS is unstoppable, which has shaped their coverage, or lack thereof, of its near defeat. You gotta love a good media narrative based on crippling fear. So what do you think about what's happening with ISIS? Let me know in the comments below. And also, you may have noticed there were no ads in front of this video. That's because YouTube will instantly demonetize anything that has to do with ISIS or Syria. What that means is we can't really afford to do episodes like this. The only reason you're seeing it is because viewers like you support us through the crowdfunding website Patreon. When you contribute on Patreon, you help us survive without YouTube ads, so we can cover topics YouTube considers too controversial. So, as a way of saying thanks to people who support us on Patreon, I'm going to answer your questions at the end of some of our episodes, just like I do on China Uncensored. Today's question comes from Andy Passmore. Washington, D.C. has a larger population than 2 states, Vermont and Wyoming. So why is Washington, D.C. not yet a state, and why doesn't the rest of the U.S. seem to care? Great question. The original agreement that created Washington, D.C. was made in 1790. Back then, the Founding Fathers were afraid that whichever state was the physical home of the capital would have too much sway over national politics. That's back when it took a week to travel from New York to D.C., and being physically close meant better access to politics. So, they created a stateless district between the northern and southern states. And back then, no one thought very many people would ever live in D.C., so representation for locals didn't really matter much. Fast forward 200 years, and it's home to 700,000 people. Oops. Right now, Washington, D.C. has no representation in the U.S. Senate. They have one delegate in the House of Representatives who is not allowed to vote on anything. The residents of D.C. are a little salty about this, as you can tell by their official license plates. So, do the residents of D.C. deserve national representation? Yes, they're American citizens and they pay taxes. But there's a problem. Based on local elections, D.C. residents vote 90% Democrat. So, do you really think Republicans are going to allow 2 new senators and 1 new representative who will almost certainly be Democrats? Sometimes politics isn't about fairness, it's about politics. Thanks for your question, Andy. We haven't received that many questions for this show so far, so I'd love to hear yours. But first, please support America Uncovered with $1 or more per episode through the crowdfunding website Patreon. You can post your questions there. Answering questions is a way I can give a special thank you just for supporters. Thanks for watching America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. I'll see you on the next Too Controversial for YouTube episode.